Welcome to the RGLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss the challenges that China faces as it reopens. This is the first recording that I make as I have returned fully to my home, my parents' place. And I have spent quite a bit of time, unexpectedly long time, in order to get things in order and obviously to jump through the hoops of bureaucracy to get some administrative stuff in order, let's just say. And so I haven't really paid too much attention to the news and to international affairs, to geopolitics, and to the economy at large. But one thing that I have experienced, and one thing that I think a lot of people are discussing, and not just inside China, but also in a lot of Western media. By the way, I'm not following Western media, but I do have some idea of what they're talking about. This topic is China's reopening, and it was somewhat abrupt. Just as I came out of this quote-unquote quarantine, things began to ease up, and this was somewhat unexpected to me because I expected things to really start to ease out next year around February or March, perhaps. I'm not going to say why, but I have my reasons. But this came much earlier, and they came at a time when China posted successive weak economic numbers. And the reason that they are easing now is with full understanding. I think the Chinese government, the central government, are fully aware of the inertia that the public in China will show. And so they want to, I think, take some risk, that they want to open up now so that come next year in March, April, things will really begin to accelerate. I mean, economic activity will really begin to accelerate as we go out, as we come out of the flu season. But that's some background. And I want to say that in this podcast, I'm not going to suggest what. I'm not going to even suggest that they were wrong or where they were wrong. I mean, the Chinese policy, because I don't know if there were any better options given the situation in China. Now, a lot of people who haven't been to China, and even people who haven't lived in China for a long time, as I do, didn't really appreciate the level, the society, and also how the medical resources that is at the disposal of the Chinese authorities. And it's really a situation that basically meant that people, if things really get out of control, it really is messy. And because the medical resources are really limited, it is largely still a very poor country. There will be a lot of death and misery, and that will not be good. So I'm not going to suggest that there is any mistakes. Nevertheless, I'm going to say that there will be severe challenges ahead. And in this podcast, I want to touch on three things. First, I want to say that pandemic control is not the only type of control that is dragging the economy. Secondly, I want to say that control is only what is not the only cause of the economic woes that China is facing. And thirdly, I want to say that easing where the public have very little herd immunity will also bring its own challenges ahead. All right, so let's go through these 3 points one by one. The first point is that pandemic control is not the only type of control that is dragging the feet of China's economic development. Why am I saying this? Well, because there is a lot of bureaucracy. People who are outside of China, they listen to what the central government says. They listen to what the diplomatic corps says, and they think that this is how China is run. But China it has a big bureaucracy. It is highly hierarchical, and the central government does not have direct influence on how at the what is that level? Basically, how just individual, how the public experiences their daily lives, their daily interactions are with bureaucrats at the lowest level. And these people, they have their own superiors, and their superiors have their superiors. And in this system, when the central government has certain policy, but of course they cannot define everything, and so it's left for each level of bureaucrats to define what to expand on, to build on. And in this type of system, it really depends on how the officials think, or how much of a risk taker they are, right? They if they do too much in any direction, they may, and if the results are not good, they may have to take the blame. But if they do too little in any of the direction and things don't go very well, they may also have to take the blame. So in this type of environment, you will see that there are a lot of inefficiencies. And this, I think, is absolutely exhibiting itself in China. And I think there is very little hope of removing this or improving in this area. So this is also why I think that perhaps in the next few decades, China's economic development will be slower than some of the Southeast Asian countries where perhaps people are more flexible. Because in China, there are some regions where people are more flexible. People are more of a risk taker, whereas there are also a lot of regions where people are more risk averse, and so are the local officials. And these local officials will not dare to really do too much, and they also are afraid of doing too little. So what they do are not necessarily good for the for the economic development, and what they don't do may just be what is needed for the same thing, right? So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that there are also a lot of internal frictions. For example, I'm trying to buy a very cheap used car, and what I found is that in the last few years they have implemented very strict rules on what kind of cars you can register used, what kind of used cars you can buy, and you can only buy in your own city or province. You cannot buy cars from another province unless there are some other rules that some emission standards, very strict emission standards that the second-hand car meets. So for example, Euro 6, they don't call it Euro 6, they say China 6, but really it's just a copy of Euro 6. You need to get a car that's either Euro 6 or a battery electric, or at least a hybrid electric or plug-in hybrid, in order to get the car registered. Unless you buy the used car that's already registered in the city. This type of internal frictions just makes it very difficult for people to do business. It is, and also when I came out of quarantine from just because I came to China from abroad, I tried to take a train. It was very difficult. A lot of tests, a lot of bureaucracy. They would not let me into the train station because of this mobile phone, that kind of app. You need to download this app, that app, all these things. Why? It is a single country, or is it 20, 30 different countries? Why are there so many different rules? Why is it that each city, each province has its own rules, has its own basically way of enforcing the law and perhaps of interpreting the law? Is it a single country, or is it 30, 40 different countries? This type of internal frictions, I don't think is good for economic activity domestically. So that's the first point. The second point I want to say is that control, whether it's pandemic control or other forms of control or bureaucracy or internal frictions, they're not the only causes of economic difficulties that China is experiencing. Two main points. One, that is cyclical. We all know that there are economic cycles. And right now, very obviously, whether we're talking about the global economy or specifically in China, actually we're going through a tough patch. Now, in China, it's slightly different because it's really deflationary, because demand is really low while supply remains high. Demand remains low because people are poor. People are poor because they are over-leveraged, because they are over-indebted, and their salaries have been cut due to the economic difficulties. And the government has not, and I think rightly so, printed money and handed money to the population. So there is not enough money to spend, not enough money to really purchase goods. So we're going through a deflationary phase. Actually, prices are coming down for primarily services, not for imported goods. But nevertheless, that's I think this is necessary. Right, it's a necessary phase. Also, we know that the property prices were just unreasonably high, and a little bit of deflating the property bubble is really a good thing in my judgment. So it's just a cyclical thing that right now the economic activity, the level of economic activities are just not very high. And some companies who are over-indebted will go bust. Of course, the governments are introducing a lot of policies to make money more readily available to people who want to build businesses, people who want to grow businesses, and people who want to save their businesses. These are all somewhat okay things to do. I don't think necessarily it's a great idea to make money too loose. But I'm also not the one who's responsible for this. This is one thing. Also, there are external factors that we need to consider. The economic environment externally, and also the security environment externally, are really adverse. And I have touched on these issues repeatedly in my previous podcast, so I'm not going to repeat myself again. Now let's move on to the last point, which is that easing while the public have very little herd immunity is difficult. Unlike the case when, say, the West opened earlier this year, China had really always lived under very tough controls. Pandemic controls. So there were very little spread overall, and very few people have ever have ever been infected. So even though the virus is quite weak at this point, and so the government officially acknowledges this, and this is why I think it is really safe to say it. The fact is that a lot of people are have not been infected. So even though it is maybe like the common cold, but almost everyone, I think, unless you are very young, newborn, everyone has fallen ill because of the common cold. So even though you may get into contact with the cold virus, you already have a lot of immunity built up, and you're unlikely to get sick. If you are healthy young adult, you're probably not going to get sick. And even when you do get sick, it's very mild. It's milder than it would otherwise be. But with this virus, even Omicron, when the public have very little herd immunity, the spread could be very fast. And so this will result in two things. One is that even though policy-wise there is quite a bit of easing, in reality, reopening will be slow because a lot of people will fall ill. And it would take months for herd immunity to build up, and then spread will be under full control. I don't think a lot of people will necessarily die. I don't think that. I think that people are cautious enough, especially people who are vulnerable are very cautious. So I think that this is not going to be the problem. But people will get sick, maybe not very, very sick, but a little bit sick, and this is enough to hamper the reopening process. And secondly, this will be another burden on the economy. In the long term, I think this is a good thing because controlling a virus when it can no longer be controlled and at an expense that is too much compared to the benefit, it's not really sustainable. It's an untenable policy. So changing to this new policy, I think, is a wise thing. But in the short term, there are also some burdens. So what I'm saying is that you are changing from a sustained bleed to a perhaps more controlled but fast bleed. Maybe bleed is not necessarily the best word, but I think you probably understand what I want to say. Ultimately, what I want to say, despite all these 3 points that I mentioned, the difficulties, is that it is necessary to go through this phase. I think the economic environment, both domestically and internationally for China, is changing very fast. It will be impossible for China or the world to go back to 2018 or 2019. That is not to say that we should stay in 2021. There is only one way, and that is forward, right? And I think whether it is an authoritarian government, and I think there are very good reasons to say positively, to acknowledge this fact. It is a realistic, I think, at least the central government has some, it's a realistic one. And it understands, I'm pretty sure at this point now that the Chinese government fully understands two things. One, that peace is very important. It is, people say that Chinese people love space. I think yes, but no. Love face because it's good. People like to look good. But at the same time, if face comes at a cost that is too high, Chinese people don't really care about it, because you also hear people say that Chinese people are cheap, right? So when it's too costly to have face, people don't really care about that too much. And so when the cost of peace is face, I think China is ready to lose face to preserve peace. Secondly, I think the Chinese government, the central government at least, understands that economic development is very important. Perhaps this country is not free and will not be free, but at least there will be some efforts made for economic development and for improving the living standards of the general public, because that is the best way for those who are in power to stay popular and stay in power. All right. I guess that's all I have to say. I'm recording this on the, I think, the evening of the 16th of December. And I probably will process this during the weekend. I try to upload it. Obviously, that you know that it is very difficult to access certain websites from this country, but I think probably it's doable. Thanks, and have a great day.